I got served at 7:12 in the morning on the porch of my $2 million villa. But the document that turned my blood to ice wasn't the lawsuit. It was a forged deed claiming I transferred ownership due to mental instability. My parents didn't just want the house, they wanted to paint me as incompetent. Too bad they missed the one small receipt I saved that is going to tear their entire legal charade apart. My name is Isla Carter, and for the last 20 years, I have made a very comfortable living as a risk analyst. My job is to look at a perfectly healthy business, find the hairline fracture in its foundation, and predict exactly when and how the whole thing will collapse. I see disaster before it happens. I see the variables that other people miss, which is why it is so humiliating that I did not see the man in the beige windbreaker walking up my driveway until he was already on the porch step. It was 7:12 in the morning. The fog was still rolling off the Atlantic, wrapping my $2 million beach villa in a cold, gray embrace. This house in Seabrook Dunes was not just a piece of property, it was the only thing I had ever truly owned that felt safe. I bought it with cash. I bought it with 70-hour work weeks and missed holidays, and a lifetime of saying no to things I wanted so I could say yes to this one thing I needed. The man did not smile. He asked if I was Isla Carter, when I nodded, holding my lukewarm coffee mug with both hands to stop the sudden tremor in my fingers. He shoved a thick manila envelope into my chest. He said, "You have been served," turned around, and walked back to his sedan without looking back. I sat down on the teak bench I had oiled just last weekend. The envelope felt heavy, dense with paper and malice. I tore the tab. The header at the top of the first page read, "Carter versus Carter." My parents were suing me. I forced my breathing to slow down. Panic is just unmanaged data. I needed to read. I needed to understand the scope of the threat. I flipped through the complaint, my eyes scanning for keywords. The way I would with a distressed asset report, the allegations were not just lies. They were architectural masterpieces of fiction. Count 1 was misappropriation of family assets. They claimed I had used their retirement fund to secure the down payment for this house. That was laughable since their retirement fund had been empty for a decade. Drained by bad investments and my father's refusal to listen to professional advice, Count 2 was elder manipulation. They claimed I had coerced them into financial dependency. Count 3 was borrowing against a family trust, a trust that did not exist. But then I saw the name Blair, my younger sister. In the narrative constructed by their lawyer, Blair was described as the sole caregiver, the dutiful daughter who had sacrificed her own career to tend to our ailing parents, while I, the cold corporate machine, had abandoned them to rot while stealing their nest egg. Blair, who had not held a steady job since 2015. Blair, whose credit card bills I had paid off 3 separate times to keep her from being sued by collections agencies. In this document, she was a saint, and I was a predator. I turned the page, and the air left my lungs. It was a document titled Voluntary Asset Transfer Due to Mental Instability. It was a deed, a transfer of the deed to this house, the Seabrook Dunes Villa, from my name to a shared trust controlled by my parents and Blair, and at the bottom, right above the notary seal, was my signature. It looked exactly like my signature, the sharp slant of the eye, the looping tail of the sea. If I did not know better, I would have sworn I signed it. Underneath the signature line, there was a typed addendum. It stated that I, Isla Carter, acknowledged a history of severe manic episodes and financial recklessness, and was transferring the property to protect it from my own self-destructive impulses. I stood up, my coffee cup shattered on the patio stones, but I did not look down. This was not a property dispute. A property dispute is about money. This was an execution. They were not just trying to take the house, they were building a legal cage. If they could convince a judge that I was mentally unstable enough to sign this document, they could leverage that into a temporary conservatorship. They could take control of my bank accounts, my medical decisions, my life. They were trying to do to me what had been done to pop stars and heiresses, but quietly, in a small coastal town where no one would look too closely. I kept reading. It got worse. Attached to the complaint were 7 affidavits. Sworn statements from my neighbors. People I waved to when I took the trash out. People I had bought Girl Scout cookies from. Mrs. B. Gable at number 42 stated that she had seen me screaming at invisible people in my yard at 3 in the morning. Mr. Henderson, the retired dentist 2 doors down, claimed I had come to his door drunk and belligerent, threatening to burn the neighborhood down if they did not stop spying on me. I do not drink. I have not touched alcohol in 6 years. Another neighbor. A woman I had only spoken to once about lawn care claimed I had told her I believed the government was monitoring my thoughts through the power lines. I felt a cold sweat prickling on my neck. These were not just vague complaints. They were specific. They were coordinated. My parents, or their lawyer, had gone door to door, planting these stories, perhaps leveraging the fact that I kept to myself, painting my privacy as pathology. They had weaponized my quiet life against me. I looked at the house around me. The glass walls that I loved for the view now felt like the walls of a fishbowl. Who was watching me right now? Who was writing down my reaction to this lawsuit to use as proof of my instability? Look at her, they would say. Look how she stands there, shaking, paranoid. I wanted to scream, but I knew I could not. Screaming would only prove them right. I gathered the papers. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped them. I needed to go inside. I needed to lock the doors. I needed to call a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. I needed a shark. As I shoved the thick stack of papers back into the envelope, my fingers brushed against something else. A smaller, secondary envelope tucked into the back, almost stuck to the bottom. I pulled it out. It was a receipt, a copy of the notary logbook entry for the transfer deed, provided as part of the evidence of the transaction's legitimacy. It showed the date and time of the notarization, October 14th, 2025, 2:30 in the afternoon. Location, a notary public office in downtown Seabrook. I stared at the date, October 14th. My mind, usually a chaotic storm of anxiety, suddenly went dead silent. The risk analyst brain took over, the part of me that dealt in facts, in hard data, in irrefutable timelines. I walked into the kitchen and opened my laptop. I pulled up my calendar from last year. I pulled up my flight logs. On October 14th, 2025, I was not in Seabrook. I was not even in the state. I was 3,000 miles away in London, presenting a risk assessment model to a banking consortium. I had a digital trail a mile wide, passport stamps, Uber receipts, hotel keycard logs, a time-stamped video of me speaking to a room of 200 people at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time. I looked back at the document. The signature was perfect. The notary seal was real. The witness signatures were there, but it was a lie. And not just a lie. It was a provable. Physical impossibility. They had forged the deed. That was a felony. But they had also bribed or tricked a notary into falsifying a government logbook. That was fraud on a level that dissolved immunity. My parents thought they were playing a game of emotional chicken. They thought they could shame me into settling, or scare me into submission by threatening my sanity. They thought I was the scared little girl who used to hide in her room while they screamed at each other about money. They did not realize they were suing a woman who destroyed bad business models for a living. I looked at the date again. October 14th. I wasn't the one who was unstable. I wasn't the one who was going to lose everything. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Blair. I dialed the number of the most aggressive forensic accountant I knew. A man I had worked with on a corporate embezzlement case 3 years ago. The fear was still there, cold in my stomach, but rising above it was something else, a sharp, clear, cold anger. "You want my house?" I whispered to the empty room. "You can have the house, but first, I am going to burn your entire world down with the truth." I did not buy the villa at Seabrook Dunes because I loved the ocean. I respected the ocean. Sure, it was vast and indifferent and could kill you if you turned your back on it, which felt familiar to me. But the reason I signed that check, the reason I drained my savings and ate instant noodles in a studio apartment for 4 years to build the capital, was not for the view. It was for the lock on the front door. Growing up in the Carter household was like living in a museum where I was the only exhibit that had been broken in shipping. I existed, but I did not belong. My parents, David and Eleanor, were masters of the public performance. To the neighbors, they were the charming couple who hosted the best 4th of July barbecues and volunteered at the library. They were the pillars of the community. But the moment the front door clicked shut, the warmth evaporated. The air conditioning was always set to 68 degrees, but the house felt colder. Discipline was not physical. They were too smart for bruises. Discipline was silence. If I got a B on a report card, I became a ghost. For 3 days. Nobody would look at me. Nobody would set a place for me at the dinner table. I would have to make a sandwich and eat it in my room, listening to the clink of silverware downstairs, listening to them laugh with Blair. Blair. My sister was 2 years younger and made of entirely different material, where I was sharp edges and questions. Blair was soft curves and compliance. She figured out the game before she could even tie her shoes. If you smiled, if you agreed, if you let Mom brush your hair for an hour, you were safe, you were loved. Blair was the golden retriever. I was the stray cat they regretted feeding. I left home the morning I turned 18. I did not run away in the middle of the night. I walked out the front door at 10 in the morning while they were drinking coffee. My mother looked over the rim of her mug and said, "If you walk out that door, do not expect a penny from us, not for college, not for rent. You will come crawling back in 6 months." I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag and said, "Watch me." I did not crawl back. I worked double shifts at a diner while taking night classes. I learned to code on a library computer. I ate bread and peanut butter for dinner more nights than I can count. Every promotion, every raise, every bonus was a brick in the wall I was building between me and them. I paid for my own degree. I paid for my own car. And eventually, I paid $2 million cash for a house that had my name, and only my name, on the deed. That house was my promise to the 8-year-old girl eating a sandwich alone in her bedroom. It was the physical manifestation of a vow. I will have a place where no one has the authority to tell me to leave. And now, 24 years later, they were trying to evict me not just from my home, but from my own autonomy. I looked down at the legal complaint again. The words swam before my eyes. The narrative they had constructed was so insidious because it weaponized their own failures. They claimed I had abandoned them, in their world. My independence was not an achievement. It was an act of aggression. My mother used to say, "You owe us. Isla, we gave you life. You are an investment that hasn't paid out." She did not say it with malice. She said it like it was a line item on a ledger. To them, children were retirement plans. You fed them and clothed them so that one day they would serve you. Blair had accepted this contract. She had stayed close. She lived in a condo they paid for, drove a car they leased, and in exchange, she was their eternal child. She was 39 years old, but she still spoke in that breathy, helpless voice when she wanted something. She liked the standard of living they provided, the country club memberships and the designer purses. But she refused to do the work required to earn them. She was a beautiful, hollow statue held up by our parents' money that I now knew they did not have. That was the twist. They were broke. That had to be it. You do not sue your estranged daughter for her house unless the walls are closing in. A wave of nausea hit me. It wasn't fear anymore. It was that old, sticky guilt, the button they had installed in my psyche decades ago. Maybe I was cold. Maybe I should have called more. Maybe if I had just played the game like Blair, we wouldn't be here. The thought was a reflex, a phantom limb pain from a relationship that had been dead for years. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The ocean was churning, gray foam biting at the sand. No, I crushed the guilt. I suffocated it before it could take a breath. They did not want a relationship. They wanted a resource. They saw my success not as something to be proud of, but as a vein of gold they had failed to mine. And because they couldn't mine it with guilt anymore, they were using the law. They were using Blair as the face of the lawsuit because she was sympathetic, the devoted sister, the carer, and I was the unstable, paranoid spinster living alone in a fortress. They wanted me to react. They wanted me to call them screaming. They wanted me to hire a high-priced litigator who would fire off aggressive letters, proving that I was erratic and combative. They expected me to fight like a wounded animal, but I am a risk analyst. I do not fight with emotion. I fight with leverage. If I hired a lawyer now, a standard family law attorney, they would treat this like a standard dispute. We would go to mediation. We would argue about mental health evaluations. It would drag on for months, bleeding me dry and giving my parents exactly the platform they wanted to smear my reputation. I needed to know more. I needed to know how they got a notary to sign a logbook for a woman who was in London. I needed to know why my neighbors, people I had never quarreled with, were suddenly terrified of me. I needed to find the cracks in their story before I applied any pressure. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I did not dial a law firm. I dialed the number for a private investigator I used for background checks on potential corporate mergers. I am not going to sue them yet, I whispered to the empty, beautiful house that I had built from the ground up. I am going to study them. My parents had spent my entire childhood teaching me that love was conditional and that survival depended on silence. They thought they had raised a victim. They forgot that when you raise a child in the cold, she learns how to build her own fire, and she learns exactly how to watch things burn. I set the phone down. The trembling in my hands had stopped. The sadness was gone, replaced by the icy clarity of a problem that needed to be solved. They wanted a family drama. I was going to give them a forensic audit. I turned my dining room table into a war room. The legal complaint was dissected into piles, organized not by allegation, but by financial impact. It was 10:14 in the morning, and the coastal fog had burned off, leaving the room bright and unforgiving. I needed that light. I needed to see the cracks in the story they had plastered over my life. The first crack appeared on page 42, buried in an addendum about liabilities. According to the lawsuit, I owed the family trust $280,000. I stared at the number. $280,000. It was a specific, ugly sum. I pulled the promissory notes attached as evidence. There were 3 of them, dated over the last 18 months. Each one bore my signature, that same looping, perfect forgery I had seen on the deed. But it was the dates that made my analyst's brain lock into gear. The first note, for $85,000, was dated June 3rd, 2025. I opened my laptop and pulled up my cloud calendar. June 3rd. I clicked the date. I was not in Seabrook Dunes. I was not even on the ground. I was on a flight to Tokyo for a merger acquisition assessment. I had the boarding pass in my digital wallet. I had the credit card charge for the in-flight Wi-Fi. I had a selfie I took of Mount Fuji from the window seat at 30,000 feet. I checked the second note. August 12th, a Tuesday. I was in a deposition for a client in New York City, sitting in a room with 5 lawyers and a court stenographer who typed every word I said from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. They were lazy. That was the only conclusion. They had forged my name, but they hadn't bothered to check my location. They assumed I lived the same small, static life they did, where days blended into weeks. They didn't realize my life was a grid of time-stamped obligations. But where did the money go? You can't just invent debt. There has to be a receiving end. I picked up my phone and called the bank mentioned in the loan documents. It was a regional bank, one I had used for my first checking account in college but hadn't touched in 20 years. I navigated the automated hell of the phone tree until I got a human being. I gave her my social security number and verified my identity. Then I asked the question that made my stomach turn over. I need a list of all accounts currently active under my social security number. I said. The woman on the line typed for a moment. I hear keys clacking. Then she said, I see your primary checking, your savings, and the joint high-yield savings account opened in January of last year. The air left the room. I don't have a joint account, I said, my voice flat. There is a pause. Well, it is listed here. Ms. Carter, joint with a Blair Carter? It was opened online. I closed my eyes. Online. To open an account online, you don't need a face. You need data. You need a social security number. You need a date of birth. And you need to answer security questions. I asked her what the security questions were. She hesitated, citing protocol. But I pushed. I told her I was looking at a police report for identity theft. A lie, for now. And she softened. The first question was the name of your first pet. She said, Buster, a golden retriever we had when I was 6. The second was the street you grew up on, Maple Terrace. The third was your mother's maiden name. These weren't security questions. These were family trivia. My parents and Blair didn't need to hack a server. They just needed to remember my childhood. They had used their intimacy with my history to bypass the safeguards meant to protect my future. They had opened an account in my name, funneled this fake loan money into it, and likely drained it, leaving me with the debt and the paper trail. I hung up and went to my physical filing cabinet. My hands were moving fast now, flipping through years of meticulously organized records. I was looking for a ghost. I found it in the folder marked Miscellaneous 2025. It was a single sheet of paper I had received 14 months ago, a confirmation of address change request from the post office. At the time, I thought it was a clerical error. The new address listed was my parents' house. I had called the post office, corrected it, and forgotten about it. I held the paper up to the light. It wasn't an error. It was a test run. They were seeing if they could redirect my mail, maybe to intercept bank statements or legal notices. When I corrected it, they must have switched to digital correspondence to keep me in the dark. I needed air. The house felt contaminated. I walked out the front door and down the driveway. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. I saw Mrs. Gable watering her hydrangeas 3 houses down. She was one of the neighbors who had signed an affidavit claiming I screamed at invisible people. I walked toward her. I didn't stomp. I didn't run. I just walked. Mrs. Gable. I called out. She froze. She didn't turn the hose off. She just stared at me, her eyes widening behind her oversized sunglasses. Then she dropped the hose and practically ran toward her front door. Mrs. Gable, I just want to talk, I said, stopping at the edge of her lawn. Stay away, she shrieked, fumbling with her keys. Your mother said you were dangerous. She said you stopped taking your meds. The door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked. I stood there, the water from her hose pooling on the sidewalk. Dangerous. Meds. They weren't just saying I was incompetent. They were painting me as violent. I turned and saw Mr. Henderson walking his terrier. He didn't run. He stopped and looked at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion. You need help. Isla, he said, shaking his head. Your parents are good people. They're just trying to save you from yourself. I walked up to him. Mr. Henderson, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. When was the last time you actually saw me do something wrong? Not heard about it. Saw it. He blinked, caught off guard. Well, your mother, she showed us. Showed you what? The pictures, he said, the ones of you at that bar. Passed out in a booth. It broke her heart. Isla, she was crying right there in my kitchen. She said you've been battling the bottle for 10 years. I felt a cold shock go through me. Mr. Henderson, I said, I haven't had a drink since I was 36. He looked at me, scanning my face for the signs of addiction he had been told to find. He didn't see them, but it didn't matter. The story was already lodged in his brain. You don't have to lie to us, he said gently, which was worse than if he had shouted. We just want you to get better. That's why I signed the paper. To help you get into that facility. Facility. The word hung in the salt air. They weren't just planning a conservatorship. They were planning to institutionalize me. If they could get a judge to sign off on an emergency order, they could stash me away in a treatment center for 30 days, long enough to liquidate the house, long enough to transfer the assets. I walked back to my house, passing 2 other neighbors who suddenly found the pavement very interesting. It was brilliant, in a sick, twisted way. They had weaponized the community's empathy. They knew these people were decent. They knew that if a weeping mother came to their door with photos of her daughter looking destitute and sick, they would want to help. My parents hadn't stolen my house yet. They had stolen my reputation. They had turned my privacy into proof of my sickness. And the photo? I knew exactly what it was. 6 years ago, at a company retreat, I had food poisoning. There was a photo of me with my head on a table, looking green and exhausted, while a colleague held a glass of water nearby. Crop out the water, add a grainy filter, and suddenly I am a blackout drunk. I walked inside and locked the door behind me. I felt the walls closing in. The legal system assumes rational actors. It assumes that parents love their children. It assumes that sworn affidavits are based on fact, not manipulated pity. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. The area code was local. I opened it. Don't go to court alone. They will push for incapacity. They have a doctor lined up. I stared at the screen. Who was this? A neighbor with a guilty conscience? A clerk at the law firm? I didn't reply. I just took a screenshot. My parents wanted to paint me as a child who needed protection. They wanted to strip me of my agency. They thought they were rescuing a drowning woman, but they forgot one thing. I am the one who calculates the depth before I jump. And I was just beginning to find the bottom. I walked into the courtroom alone. That was a calculated risk. I could have hired a standard defense attorney, but I knew that if I brought a shark in a suit this early, my parents would play the victim card even harder. They would say I was using my ill-gotten wealth to bully them. So I stood at the defendant's table with nothing but a notepad and a pen. Dressed in the same charcoal blazer I wore to board meetings, I wanted to look like the only adult in the room, but my parents had staged a masterpiece of courtroom theater. They sat on the plaintiff's side, huddled together like survivors of a natural disaster. My mother, usually impeccable in tailored silk, was wearing a faded cardigan that looked 3 sizes too big. My father was slumped in his chair, staring at the floor, projecting the image of a broken patriarch. And then there was Blair. My sister sat between them, and the moment I saw her, I felt a spike of genuine admiration for her commitment to the role. She was wearing a soft, pastel dress that made her look 10 years younger, and on her right wrist, there was a beige medical brace, a wrist brace. She was holding her arm gingerly against her chest, wincing every time she shifted in her seat. It was a prop, designed to suggest physical frailty, perhaps an injury sustained while caring for our parents. It was a visual anchor for the judge's sympathy, the judge, a woman named Judge Holloway with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the session to order. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my first car, stood up. He did not shout. He did not point fingers. He spoke in a low, sorrowful register, as if dragging me into court was the most painful thing the Carter family had ever been forced to do. Your Honor, he began, we are not here today because of greed. We are here because of concern. The plaintiffs, David and Eleanor Carter, have watched their eldest daughter descend into a spiral of paranoia, financial recklessness, and self-isolation for the better part of a decade. The transfer of the Seabrook Dunes property was not a seizure. It was a safeguard that Ms. Carter herself requested during a moment of clarity. I kept my face perfectly still. I wrote down the word safeguard on my notepad and underlined it twice. Sterling continued, we have submitted into evidence Exhibit A, a handwritten letter from the defendant, dated 3 months ago, in which she apologizes for her behavior and begs her parents to take over the management of her assets. My stomach turned over. A letter. Judge Holloway looked at me. Ms. Carter, do you recognize this document? A bailiff handed me a photocopy. I looked at it. The handwriting was uncanny. It had the same sharp slants, the same heavy pressure on the downstrokes. It read, Mom, Dad, I can't stop the thoughts. Please take the house. Please take the accounts. I just want to be safe again. I'm sorry for everything. It was terrified. It was pathetic. It was not me. I stood up. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. Though my heart was hammering against my ribs, I have never written this letter. I have not sent a handwritten letter to my parents since I was at summer camp in 1995. This is a forgery. Mr. Sterling sighed, a sound that filled the room with disappointed fatigue. Of course she denies it, Your Honor. Denial is the primary defense mechanism of her condition. We have also included a report from a forensic handwriting analyst, a certified expert with 30 years of experience, who confirms with 99% certainty that this is Ms. Carter's writing. He held up a thick report, a paid expert. They had spent money they didn't have to hire someone to steal my identity. Then he turned to Blair. Ms. Blair Carter, he said softly. Can you tell the court about your sister's behavior recently? Blair rose. She brushed her fingers over the brace on her wrist. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw the fear in her eyes. Real fear. Not of me, but of the script she'd been handed. Isla isn't herself, Blair whispered, her voice trembling just enough for the court reporter to catch. She calls us in the middle of the night, sobbing and swearing people are watching her. She threatened to tear the villa apart rather than let us help her. That's how I hurt my wrist. I was trying to stop her from grabbing Mom's car keys and bolting during one of her episodes. I stared at her. It was a lie so bold, so detailed. It wore the shape of truth. I hadn't seen Blair in 6 months. Your Honor, I cut in, fighting the urge to raise my voice. This is a fabrication. There is no police report of any such incident. There are no medical records because it never happened. Mr. Sterling pivoted toward me, his eyes cold. Ms. Carter, isn't it true that you have severed ties with all your friends? Isn't it true that you live alone in a house with a sophisticated security system because you believe you are being followed? Isn't it true that you refuse to let your parents visit for Christmas because, and I quote, they were wearing wires? He was taking my privacy, my security system, my independence, and twisting it into symptoms of schizophrenia. He was building a box around me, plank by plank. I realized then what the real game was. This wasn't about the house was just the bait. If they could prove I was incompetent, the deed transfer would stand. But more than that, if they could prove I was a danger to myself or others, they could petition for guardianship. They could take control of everything. My bank accounts, my investments, my medical decisions. I would become a ward of the state, and they would be my keepers. They were trying to delete me as a legal adult. Judge Holloway was flipping through the file. Her brow was furrowed. There was too much paper here, too many affidavits, too many dramatic claims without hard. External evidence like police reports or hospital admissions. She looked annoyed, sensing the manipulation but unable to dismiss it without cause. Ms. Carter, the judge said, looking at me over her glasses, these are serious allegations. The plaintiffs have submitted sworn testimony from 7 of your neighbors claiming you are a disturbance to the community. They have a handwriting expert. You have a denial. Do you have any evidence to refute these claims today? I opened my mouth to speak, to tell her about the flight logs, the passport stamps, the fact that I was in London when the deed was signed. But before I could speak, Mr. Sterling interrupted. Your Honor, given the defendant's erratic behavior in the past and her obvious agitation today, we believe it is unsafe to leave this matter unresolved. We are not asking for a judgment on the property today. We are asking for an interlocutory order. He paused for effect. We formally request that the court order an immediate emergency capacity evaluation for Ms. Isla Carter to be conducted by a court-appointed psychiatrist within the next 48 hours. Until such an evaluation is complete, we ask that her assets be frozen to prevent further dissipation. The trap snapped shut, if I refused. I looked uncooperative and crazy. If I agreed, I was handing my fate to a doctor they might have already influenced, or risking a diagnosis that could be twisted. A capacity evaluation would put me in the system. It would stain my record forever. Even if I passed, the mere fact that it was ordered would flag me in every background check for the rest of my career. I looked at the judge. She was considering it. It was the safe choice for her. If she let me go and I was crazy, she would be liable. If she ordered the test, She was just being cautious. "I need a moment to review the motion," I said, my voice tight, as the courtroom murmured. I turned away from the bench. Looking out into the gallery, it was mostly empty. A few bored clerks, a local reporter scribbling on a pad. But in the back row, sitting in the shadows near the exit, there was a man I did not recognize. He was elderly, perhaps in his late 60s, wearing a frayed tweed jacket that had seen better decades. He was clutching a brown leather briefcase on his lap with white-knuckled intensity. He wasn't looking at the judge. He wasn't looking at my parents. He was looking right at me. As our eyes met, he started to stand up. He pushed himself half out of the bench, his face contorted in a grimace of indecision or pain. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump or step back. Then, he saw Mr. Sterling turn around. The old man froze. He sank back down into the hard wooden bench, pulling his briefcase tight against his chest, making himself small. I didn't know who he was, but in a room full of people trying to bury me, he was the only one who looked like he was carrying a shovel he didn't want to use. The gavel was suspended in the air, a piece of dark mahogany that was about to strike the block and seal my fate as a ward of the state. Judge Holloway had her pen poised over the order for my emergency capacity evaluation. I could see the ink glistening on the nib. My parents were holding hands, their heads bowed in a performance of prayerful relief. Blair was dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. I gripped the edge of the defendant's table so hard my knuckles turned white. I calculated the probability of escaping this 0. The system was designed to protect the vulnerable, and my parents had successfully hacked the definition of vulnerable to include themselves. Then, a voice cracked through the silence of the courtroom. "Stop." It was not a shout. It was a rusty, unused sound, like a car engine turning over after a decade in a garage. Judge Holloway froze. Her head snapped up. In the back row, the man in the tweed jacket was standing. He was trembling, clutching his briefcase against his chest as if it contained a bomb. "Mr. Sterling, my parents' lawyer," spun around. "Your Honor, I must insist that the gallery remain silent. This is a closed hearing regarding a sensitive mental health matter." The old man walked forward. He moved with a stiff, painful gait, ignoring the bailiff who had started to move toward him. He walked right up to the partition that separated the public from the participants. "I am not a member of the public," he said, his voice gaining a little more traction. "My name is Gordon Vale. I am a retired records manager for the State Notary Commission. And I'm telling you that the document in your hand is physically impossible." The room went dead silent. My mother's head jerked up, and for the first time, the mask of the grieving, concerned parent slipped. Her eyes were wide, hard, and terrified. Judge Holloway lowered her pen. She looked at the bailiff, signaling him to stand down. "Approach the bench. Mr. Vale." Gordon fumbled with the clasps of his briefcase. His fingers were thick and spotted with age, but they moved with a practiced, bureaucratic rhythm. He pulled out 2 things. One was a thick, leather-bound ledger with yellowed pages. The other was a photocopy of a technical manual. He laid them on the judge's bench. Mr. Sterling was already objecting. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This man is not on the witness list. We have no idea who he is or what his mental state is. He could be another one of the defendant's paranoid delusions come to life." "I am not a delusion," Gordon said, looking directly at my father. "And I am not senile. I am the man who processed the serial numbers for every notary seal issued in this county between 1995 and 2023. He pointed a shaking finger at the deed, the one transferring my house to my parents due to my alleged insanity. "Look at the seal," Gordon said. "Look at the crimped edge. Every notary stamp has a microscopic serial number embedded in the die. It is a security feature most people do not know exists. It tells you when the stamp was manufactured and who it was issued to." Judge Holloway picked up a magnifying glass she kept on her desk. She leaned over the document. Gordon opened his ledger. He ran his finger down a column of numbers written in meticulous, Hand-penned script. The seal on that document bears the serial number 4922 Alpha. Gordon recited without looking at the paper. That series was issued to a notary named Marcus Finch in 2021. Judge Holloway looked up. That matches the name on the stamp. Yes, Gordon said. But Marcus Finch reported that stamp stolen out of his vehicle on November 12, 2022. He filed a police report. He was issued a new stamp with a different serial number the following week. The stamp on that document, the one dated last month, was officially destroyed in the state registry 3 years ago. The air in the room changed. It shifted from the sterile atmosphere of a family dispute to the cold, sharp air of a criminal investigation. My analyst brain was firing on all cylinders. This was the variable I had missed. I had been looking at the signature, the dates, the flight logs. I had not looked at the tool itself. Mr. Sterling looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Your Honor, this is hearsay. Mr. Vale is a disgruntled former employee. We have no way of verifying these private logs. I have the police report number right here, Gordon said, pulling another slip of paper from his pocket. And I have the decommissioning order from the Secretary of State. He turned to look at my mother. And I remember you, Mrs. Carter. My mother flinched. She actually recoiled in her seat, pressing back against my father. You came to my office 7 years ago, Gordon said, his voice steady now. You wanted me to notarize a loan modification for your daughter. You said she was busy with work and couldn't come in. You offered me $500 cash to stamp it without her present. He looked at me. I saw sadness in his eyes, a deep, weary apology. I refused. Gordon continued. I told you it was illegal. I told you that a notary's job is to witness the signing, not to facilitate convenience. You left angry. 2 days later, a junior clerk in my office, a young man with gambling debts, processed a document for you. He was fired 6 months later for fraud. But by then, the paperwork was already in the system. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't a one-time desperate act to get the beach house. This was a system. My parents had been forging my life for years. They had been taking out loans, modifying agreements, and shifting assets using a network of compromised professionals and stolen tools. They weren't just bad parents. They were seasoned identity thieves. Gordon turned back to the judge. When I saw the notice for this hearing in the paper, when I saw the names I knew, I checked my old logs. I knew they would use the stolen stamp. It is the only way to bypass the digital verification system we installed in 2024. Judge Holloway set the magnifying glass down. She looked at Mr. Sterling. She looked at my parents. The sympathy that had been there 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by the terrifying neutrality of the law when it realizes it is being mocked. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, her voice dropping an octave. Do you have the original deed with you? The wet ink original? Sterling stammered. I believe it is at my office. Your Honor, we brought certified copies for the judge cut him off. This hearing is adjourned. She slammed the file shut. I am vacating the motion for a capacity evaluation. I am issuing an order for the immediate production of the original deed, along with the originals of every promissory note and financial document attached to this complaint. They are to be delivered to the clerk of the court by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. She leaned forward, staring directly at my mother. And let me be clear. If the State Police Forensics Lab confirms that the seal on those documents matches a stolen serial number, we will not be back here for a civil hearing. We will be across the street in criminal court. She banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. My mother let out a sob, but it wasn't the fake, theatrical sob she had used earlier. This was a real sound of panic. My father looked pale, his hands shaking as he tried to gather their papers. Blair sat frozen, staring at her wrist brace as if she didn't know why she was wearing it. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to hold me. I looked at Gordon Vale. He was packing his ledger away, his hands still trembling slightly. He looked exhausted, like he had just run a marathon. I walked over to the partition. Mr. Vale, I said. He looked up. He didn't smile. I didn't do it for you, he said quietly. "I did it because the law is supposed to mean something. A seal is supposed to mean truth. If that goes, everything goes." I understood. He was a man of the system, just like me. We believed in rules. We believed in order, and my parents were agents of chaos. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once, turned, and walked out of the courtroom. A ghost who had returned just long enough to haunt the right people. I turned back to the plaintiff's table. My parents were arguing with Sterling in hushed, frantic whispers. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. For the first time since the process server stepped onto my porch, I didn't feel like a defendant. I felt like an analyst who had just found the error in the code, the glitch that was going to bring the whole system crashing down. They thought they were building a cage for me, but Gordon Vale had just handed me the keys, and I was going to lock them inside their own lies. I walked out of that courtroom and dialed a number I had been saving for a worst-case scenario. I did not call a family law attorney. Family law assumes that both parties, deep down, want what is best for the unit. I needed someone who understood that my family was a criminal enterprise disguised as a domestic tragedy. I hired Avery Klein. Avery is a specialist in financial fraud and high-conflict protective orders. She does not have a warm office with pictures of sailboats on the wall. She works out of a steel and glass tower, and her retainer is $10,000 just to open a file. I wired the money from my emergency fund 10 minutes after leaving the courthouse. When I walked into her conference room an hour later, she had already pulled the docket. She looked at me with eyes that were sharp, dark, and completely devoid of pity. Pity is useless. Strategy is everything. "We have 48 hours, Avery said, sliding a tablet across the mahogany table. "The judge gave us a window, but your parents are cornered animals right now. They will try to liquidate, hide, or destroy whatever they can before the sun comes up on Friday. We need to lock the exits. We went to work. This was not emotional processing. This was a tactical strike. Step 1 was the credit freeze. We did not just freeze my accounts. We locked down my Social Security number with all 3 bureaus. We put a fraud alert on every banking institution that had a branch within 50 miles of Seabrook Dunes. Step 2 was the data extraction. Avery drafted subpoenas for the IP addresses used to access the fraudulent joint account. We needed to prove that the login attempts came from my parents' router, not mine. We requested cell tower triangulation data for the dates on the promissory notes to physically place my phone 3,000 miles away from the signing table. Then came the masterstroke. "They want to question your capacity?" Avery asked, tapping a pen against her chin. "Do not wait for the court to order an evaluation. If the court orders it, they pick the doctor, or worse. Your parents suggest one. We get ahead of it." That afternoon, I voluntarily checked myself into the office of a forensic psychiatrist with a reputation for being unbribable and brutal. I spent 4 hours undergoing the most rigorous mental health evaluation of my life. I took cognitive tests, personality inventories, and answered questions about my history until my throat was dry. When I walked out at 6 in the evening, I had a sealed report stating that I was not only competent, but possessed above-average executive function and emotional stability. I had proof of sanity. If they tried to play the crazy card again, I would not just deny it. I would bury them under clinical data. The next morning, we filed for a restraining order, but not a standard one. We filed for protection against litigation abuse and harassment. We framed their lawsuit not as a legal grievance, but as a tool of coercion. Then came the hardest part, the neighbors. Avery looked at the 7 affidavits on the table. "These are their ammunition," she said. "They have weaponized the community against you. We need to dismantle these stories. Not by suing them, but by showing them they have been played." I did not want to go back to my street. I wanted to hide in a hotel, but hiding makes you look guilty. I drove back to Seabrook Dunes. I carried a binder with color-coded tabs. I walked up to Mrs. Gable's door first. When she opened it, she looked ready to scream again. She had her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the emergency dial. "Mrs. Gable," I said, keeping my voice lower than the wind chimes on her porch. "I am not here to argue. I just want you to look at one piece of paper. If you still think I'm crazy after that, I will never step foot on your lawn again." She hesitated, her curiosity warring with her fear. I held up a flight manifest. "You signed a statement saying I was screaming in my yard on August 12th. I said, 'Look at this. On August 12th. I was in Singapore. This is a time-stamped photo of me at the airport. This is my passport stamp." She squinted at the paper, then she looked at me. "But your mother said my mother lied to you," I said gently. "She used your kindness. She knew you would want to help a sick girl, so she invented a sick girl." I watched the realization wash over her face. It was painful to witness. It was the look of a good person realizing their empathy had been used as a crowbar. Her hand dropped. She invited me in. By the time I left 20 minutes later, she was crying. Not out of fear, but out of shame. She wrote a recantation of her testimony on the spot. I went door to door. It was surgical. I showed Mr. Henderson the sobriety chips I kept in a box, not because I was in a program, but because I had supported a friend who was. I showed him the blood test results from my annual physicals proving I had a clean liver and 0 toxins in my system. One by one, the affidavits crumbled. People were shocked. Then they were embarrassed. Then they were angry. They realized my parents hadn't just attacked me. They had made fools of the neighbors. But 2 of them held out. The couple at the end of the cul-de-sac, the Millers, refused to look at my binder. They stood in their doorway, arms crossed, their faces set in stubborn loyalty to my parents. "We know what we saw." "Mr. Miller said, his voice tight. "Your mother showed us the medical file. She showed us the doctor's note saying you were dangerous." I froze. "What doctor's note?" I asked. "The one from the clinic." Mrs. Miller snapped. "She said the doctor is ready to sign the commitment papers as soon as the judge gives the order. She has the whole file in her car." I didn't push them further. I didn't need their apology. I needed that sentence. I walked back to my car and called Avery. "They have a doctor," I said, my engine idling. "The Millers said my mother showed them a file. They said a doctor is ready to sign commitment papers." Avery was silent for a moment. I could hear her typing furiously in the background. "If they have a doctor ready to sign without ever examining you, that is not malpractice. That is conspiracy," she said. "I am going to run a search for any medical records created under your name in the last 6 months. If they used your insurance or social security number to generate a file, it will show up in the clearinghouse." I drove to Avery's office to wait. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the city skyline. I felt a strange calm. We were not just defending the house anymore. We were hunting. At 8:45 in the evening, Avery walked into the conference room. She was holding a single sheet of paper. Her face was pale. "We found it," she said. She laid the paper down. It was a billing record from a private psychiatric facility called Whispering Pines. "There is a patient file number 2049 created 3 weeks ago," Avery said, pointing to the line item. "Patient name, Isla Carter. Diagnosis, paranoid schizophrenia with acute violent tendencies. Prescribing physician, Dr. Eris Thorne." I stared at the name. I had never heard of Dr. Thorne. I had never been to Whispering Pines. "They created a ghost patient," Avery said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They built a medical history for you. They were going to present this to the emergency judge. If this doctor signed an affidavit saying he treated you, and you were never there, he goes to prison." I finished. Avery nodded. "And your parents go with him." She picked up her phone. "We are not waiting for the hearing," she said. "I'm calling the medical board, and then I am calling the district attorney. We just found the smoking gun, Isla, and it is pointed right at their heads." The vibration of my phone against the granite countertop sounded like a drill in the silent kitchen. It was 12:14 in the morning. I had been staring at the wall for an hour, my mind replaying the image of the fake patient file Avery had found, the file that was supposed to bury me. I looked at the screen. The name flashing there made my stomach tighten. My sister. I let it ring 3 times. My sister had not called me voluntarily in 4 years. Every communication we had was filtered through our parents or, more recently, through their lawyers. I picked it up but said nothing. I just listened to the breathing on the other end. Isla? Her voice was thin, stripped of the performative sweetness she had worn in the courtroom. Please, I need to see you. I am not meeting you. Blair, I said, my voice flat. Talk to my lawyer. No lawyers, she whispered. And no mom and dad. I am at the 24-hour diner on Route 9, the one near the old marina. I am alone. Please, Isla. I think they are going to ruin us both. I hung up. I put on my coat. I checked the pepper spray in my pocket, a habit I had developed since the neighbors started looking at me like I was a ticking bomb. When I walked into the diner 20 minutes later, the fluorescent lights were humming with that headache-inducing buzz that only exists in places open at 3 a.m. Blair was in a booth in the back. She looked wrecked. The pastel dress from court was gone, replaced by a gray hoodie that she was drowning in. Her hair, usually sprayed into helmet-like perfection, was pulled back in a messy knot, but the thing that stopped me dead was her hands. She was holding a mug of black coffee with both hands. There was no wrist brace. Her right wrist, the one she had cradled in court like a broken wing, was perfectly fine. I slid into the booth opposite her. I did not order anything. I just looked at the uninjured wrist until she pulled her sleeves down to cover it. It is a prop, isn't it? I asked. Blair looked down at the table. Mom bought it at a pharmacy in the next town over. She said it added visual weight to the testimony. Visual weight, that was my mother's phrase. Not a lie, just an aesthetic adjustment to the truth. Why are you here, Blair? I asked. She took a shaky breath. They lied to me too. Isla. They told me that if I helped them get the villa, they would pay off the loan. They said it was the only way to save the family name. What loan? I asked. My analyst brain clicking on. Blair started to cry, but silently. Tears just leaked out of her eyes. It is not what you think. I didn't gamble. I got involved in this investment group, peer-to-peer lending with high yields. It was supposed to be safe. I put everything in. Then I borrowed against my credit cards to put more in. It was a pyramid scheme. Isla. It collapsed in January. I did the math in my head. Peer-to-peer schemes usually promised 15 to 20% returns. If she leveraged credit, she was looking at interest rates north of 25%. How much? I asked. She whispered a number. $140,000. It wasn't a fortune to a corporation, but for someone with no income like Blair, it was a death sentence. And then there is the other loan, she added, wiping her nose with her sleeve. I went to one of those rapid cash places online, the ones with the variable rates. I didn't read the fine print. The interest it compounds daily. I owe them $60,000 more. They call me 10 times a day. They threatened to call Mom and Dad's country club friends. I leaned back. So that was the leverage. My parents knew. They had probably known for months. They didn't offer to help her. They used her desperation to turn her into a weapon against me. They promised, Blair said, her voice hitching. They said the equity in your house was over $2 million. They said once the guardianship was finalized, they could liquidate it in 30 days. They would pay off my debt, and we would all start over. I looked at her. Do you realize what that means? Blair, they were selling my life to pay for your mistakes. I know, she hissed, leaning forward. I know it is wrong, but you don't understand what it is like living with them. You left. You got out. I stayed. Every day it is a competition. Who loves them more? Who is the better daughter? Mom used to tell me. Isla is the smart one, but you are the pretty one. You have to work harder to be useful. The origin wound. The thing I had spent 20 years in therapy trying to cauterize. They had raised us in a gladiator pit and told us it was a nursery. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. If you want absolution? I don't have it. She shook her head. No, I am telling you because of what happens tomorrow. She pulled her phone out and placed it on the table. They are not waiting for the judge to rule on the deed, she said. Mom has a new plan. the moment you step out of the courtroom on Friday. They are going to file an emergency ex parte motion for temporary guardianship. They are going to claim you are in immediate danger to yourself. I already know about the fake doctor. I said, Dr. Thorne, we found the file. Blair's eyes widened. You found the file? Then do you know about the 72-hour hold? I froze. What hold? If the judge signs the emergency order, they have an ambulance waiting. Blair said, a private transport. They are going to take you straight to Whispering Pines. Doctor, Thorne has already signed the admission papers. Once you are in there, they have 72 hours of legal custody before a hearing is required. Mom said she said 3 days is enough to get you to sign the power of attorney. A chill went through me that was colder than the ocean fog. This wasn't litigation. This was kidnapping with a permission slip. They were going to drug me, disorient me, and force a signature while I was chemically lobotomized. Why? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Why do they hate me this much? It can't just be the money. Blair scrolled through her phone. She stopped at a screenshot and slid it across the table to me. It was a group chat. The participants were Mom, Dad, and Blair. The timestamp was 2 weeks ago. My mother had written, "Do not feel bad for her. Blair, she has sat in that house for years judging us. She thinks she is better than this family. We are just taking back what she owes us for raising her. She doesn't deserve that view. She doesn't deserve any of it." My father had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. She doesn't deserve it. It wasn't about need. It was about punishment. I had committed the ultimate sin. I had succeeded without them. I looked up at Blair. She was watching me read my own parents' hatred. "I have one more thing," she said. "I started recording them. After the first hearing, I got scared. I thought if this goes wrong, they will blame me. They will say I was the one who stole the notary stamp." She tapped an audio file on her screen. The recording was grainy, sounded like it was taken from inside a pocket or a purse, but the voices were clear. My mother's voice. "Are you sure the timestamp won't be an issue?" "She has flight logs." A male voice answered, smooth, professional, condescending. "Eleanor, please. The logs show she was in London." "Yes, but the bank verification system doesn't look at flight logs. It looks at the challenge questions. As long as you have the answers to the security protocol, the system assumes it is her. I can override the IP mismatch from my end. I'll flag it as a travel exception." My mother. "And if they audit the call logs?" The male voice. "I delete the logs after 30 days. Standard privacy protocol." By the time she realizes the account exists, the digital footprint will be scrubbed. You just need to get that power of attorney so we can close the account officially. I knew that voice. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in a glass-walled office 3 years ago, refinancing a small business loan for a client. I knew the cadence. I knew the arrogance. It was Derek Lorne. He wasn't just a random bank employee. He was a senior relationship manager at the regional bank where the fraudulent account was opened. A man I had met once at a Chamber of Commerce mixer. My mother had been there too. I remembered her charming him, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm. They hadn't just hacked a computer. They had recruited a human insider. I looked at Blair. "Does he know?" I asked. "Does this guy know you are recording this?" "No," she said. "Nobody knows. Just you." I picked up her phone. "Send this to me. Right now." Blair hesitated. Her thumb hovered over the share button. "If I send this, I am admitting I was part of it. I could go to jail." "You are already in jail." "Blair," I said, "look at you. You are drowning in debt. You are terrified of your own parents. And you are wearing a fake brace to court. You are in a prison they built for you. If you give me this, I can talk to the district attorney. I can tell them you were coerced. I can't promise immunity, but I can promise you won't go down as the mastermind." She looked at the phone. Then she looked at the dark window of the diner, where her reflection stared back, a pale, frightened woman who had run out of road. She tapped the screen. The file swooshed into my inbox. "Thanks," I said. "Get out of the house. Isla," she whispered. "Don't go home tonight." If they know you are on to the doctor, they might try something before the hearing. I stood up. I didn't hug her. We were past that. But I looked at her with the first real honesty we had shared in decades. You should keep the brace off, I said. It's harder to sign a confession when you're wearing it. I walked out into the night air. I had the voice of the insider. I had the text messages proving malice. And I had the sister who had finally realized that in the Carter family, survival wasn't a team sport. I got into my car and locked the doors. I didn't go home. I drove straight to Avery's office. It was 3:30 in the morning. We had work to do. We sat in Avery's office, the city lights below us blurring into a grid of indifference. It was 4 in the morning. The audio file Blair had sent me was playing on a loop. But we weren't listening to the words anymore. We were analyzing the background noise, the pauses, the intonation. We had a name, Derek Lorne. Avery ran him through a professional database that cost more per month than my car payment. Derek Lorne was a senior relationship manager at First Coastal Bank. He had been there for 12 years. He had a clean record, a mortgage in the suburbs, and crucially, he was the officer of record on the fraudulent joint account my parents had opened in my name. He is the weak link, Avery said, staring at his LinkedIn profile on the screen. He is not a criminal mastermind. Isla. He is a mid-level bureaucrat who wanted to feel important. Your mother probably made him feel like a hero for helping a distressed family. We didn't sleep. By 8 in the morning, Avery had drafted a 60-page formal complaint to the bank's internal fraud division. We didn't just send a letter. We sent a 60-page formal complaint with exhibits. We attached the affidavit from Gordon Vale regarding the stolen notary stamp. We attached the flight logs proving I was out of the country when the account was accessed. And we attached the audio file at 9:30. We walked into the main branch of First Coastal. We didn't ask for a teller. We asked for the chief risk officer. When they saw the paperwork, the color drained from the branch manager's face. Banks fear two things: regulatory fines and public scandals. We were threatening both. They tried to stall. A nervous legal counsel came into the room and offered to close the account and forgive the debt immediately if we signed a non-disclosure agreement. They wanted to bury it. They wanted to sweep Derek Lorne under the rug and pretend this was a clerical error. Avery didn't even blink. She leaned forward and said, "We are not here for a refund. We are here for the audit trail. I want the access logs. I want the IP addresses. And I want the recording of the verification call where Derek Lorne bypassed federal identity protocols. If I do not have them by noon, I am walking across the street to the FBI field office to file a report for wire fraud. They gave us the logs at 11:45. We sat in a private conference room and played the recording of the call that opened the account. It was chilling. The voice on the line was my mother. But it wasn't the woman who had screamed at me in the kitchen. It was a terrifying performance of maternal grief. "Oh, Derek, thank you for taking my call," she said, her voice trembling. "I am just so worried about Isla. She is in one of her states again. She lost her debit card, and she is refusing to leave the house. I just need to make sure she has access to funds so she doesn't starve." Then came Derek's voice. Smooth, helpful. "I understand. Mrs. Carter, we can certainly set up a secondary access point for you to monitor. I just need to verify her identity for the system. Is she there with you?" "She is sleeping," my mother whispered. "The medication knocks her out. Can't we just use the security questions? I know all the answers. I am her mother." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where Derek Lorne decided whether to follow the law or be a nice guy. "Okay," he said. "Let's do the challenge questions. Name of first pet?" "Buster," my mother said instantly. "Name of elementary school?" "Oak Creek." "Mother's maiden name?" "Sullivan." "Okay." "Eleanor, I am overriding the voice verification requirement. The account is active." I sat there, staring at the speakerphone. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. This was a new kind of violence. It wasn't physical. They hadn't hit me. They hadn't locked me in a room. They had committed administrative violence. They had used the intimate details of my childhood. the name of the dog I cried over when he died, the school where I learned to read, as keys to unlock a cage they were building for me. They had turned my history into a weapon. Isla. Avery said softly, "Look at the timestamp." I looked at the log. The call was made 3 months ago. "This proves premeditation," Avery said. "They didn't do this because you were unstable. They did this to create a history of instability. They manufactured the crisis so they could solve it." We left the bank with a certified copy of the recording and the full access logs. Derek Lorne was currently being interviewed by internal security. His career was over. But I didn't care about Derek. He was just a tool. We went straight to the courthouse. Avery filed an emergency motion to stay the capacity evaluation. We attached the bank fraud report and the transcript of the call. Judge Holloway read it in chambers. She didn't even call a hearing. She issued a temporary order immediately. The court hereby suspends all pending motions regarding the capacity of the defendant. Isla Carter. All medical evaluations are stayed until further notice. The plaintiff is ordered to cease all financial activity related to the defendant immediately. It was a win, a massive one. The threat of the psych ward was gone. They couldn't touch me, but my mother didn't know that yet. At 4:15 in the afternoon, my phone pinged with an email. It was from my mother. The subject line was, "Let's heal." I tapped it open. Isla. It read, "We are so tired of fighting. We know you are hurting. We know we have made mistakes. Please, let's stop the lawyers. We want to drop the lawsuit. We just want you to be safe. I have attached a settlement proposal. It basically says you keep the house. We walk away, and we just go back to being a family. Please sign it so we can end this nightmare." Avery read it over my shoulder. "It's a trap," she said instantly. I clicked on the attachment. It was a PDF titled settlement_agreement_final.pdf. It looked standard. It had legal language about dismissing the case with prejudice. It looked like a surrender, but I am a risk analyst. I don't trust surface data. I saved the file and right-clicked on it. I selected properties and then details. I looked at the metadata. The author was listed as David Carter. The creation date was today at 3:30, but it was the edit history that made my blood run cold. The last modification was made 10 minutes ago, and the software used to create it wasn't Microsoft Word. It was a program called a document editing tool. Why would they use an editing program on a final PDF? "Avery, look at page 3, I said. We scrolled down. Buried in the middle of a paragraph about release of liability, there was a sentence that looked slightly different. The font was a fraction of a shade darker. The defendant agrees to grant the plaintiff's durable power of attorney for all healthcare decisions for a period of 90 days to facilitate the transition. They had hidden a medical power of attorney inside a property settlement. If I had signed this, thinking I was just keeping my house, I would have legally handed them the right to commit me. They were trying to trick me into institutionalizing myself." Avery let out a low, dangerous laugh. "They are not just desperate," she said. "They are sloppy, and they just gave us the final nail." She took a screenshot of the metadata. "Do not reply," she said. "We are going to let them think you are reading it. We are going to let them think they won. And then tomorrow morning, we are going to show the judge that they tried to defraud the court and the defendant while under investigation for identity theft." I looked at the email again. "Let's heal." They didn't want to heal. They wanted to consume. I closed the laptop. The sun was setting over the city, turning the sky a bruised purple. "You know what the saddest part is?" I asked Avery. "What?" "If they had just asked me for money 5 years ago, I probably would have given it to them." Avery looked at me, her face softening for the first time. "That is why they picked you, Isla. Because you are a giver, and they are takers. But the thing about takers is that eventually, they try to take too much, and they choke on it." Tomorrow was Friday, the final hearing. The trap was set. But this time, I wasn't the one standing on the trapdoor. We dangled the bait at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. It was a simple email, drafted by Avery, but written in my voice. The voice of a tired, broken daughter who just wanted the noise to stop. "I am listening." I wrote, but I cannot sign anything that looks like a legal surrender. If you want to settle, send me a document that focuses on family reunification. Not just asset forfeiture. I need to know you want me. Not just the house. It was the perfect lure for a narcissist. I was appealing to their image of themselves as benevolent saviors. I was giving them permission to play the hero. My mother took the bait in less than 11 minutes. Her reply hit my inbox with a frantic energy. She didn't just send an email. She sent a revised draft of the settlement agreement, and because she was rushing, because she was terrified that the window for the guardianship was closing, she overreached. Avery projected the document onto the wall of her office. "Look at Clause 14, Avery said, pointing a laser pointer at the screen. I read it. To ensure the ongoing stability of the family unit and to prevent future relapses, the defendant voluntarily grants David and Eleanor Carter durable power of attorney regarding all psychiatric and medical decisions for a period of 12 months. They had dropped the pretense. They weren't asking for the deed to the villa anymore. They were asking for the deed to my body. By putting this in writing, by making it a condition of the settlement, they had just handed us proof of motive. This wasn't about protecting assets. This was about stripping a 42-year-old woman of her civil rights. They wanted the power to force medicate me, to institutionalize me, to silence me. We have them, Avery said, her voice cold and satisfied. They just admitted that the goal of this lawsuit is to bypass the standard legal requirements for conservatorship. They are trying to contract their way into controlling you because they know they can't win in court. While Avery filed the email as Exhibit Z, our final piece of evidence for the motion to dismiss, I went back to Seabrook Dunes to close the loop on the ground game. I needed the neighbors. Mrs. Gable was already on board, but I needed the others to solidify the timeline. I met 3 of them in Mrs. Gable's living room. It was a surreal town hall meeting where the agenda was my sanity. When I showed them the flight logs and the time-stamped photos of me in London and Tokyo, the mood shifted from suspicion to outrage. They realized they hadn't just been helpful neighbors. They had been unwitting accomplices in a smear campaign. Mr. Henderson, the retired dentist, was shaking his head. He looked at the affidavit he had signed, the one where he claimed I was a drunk. "Your mother," she cried, he said, his voice thick with regret. "She sat right there on my sofa and cried about how you were drinking yourself to death. She said she found bottles hidden in your garden." "I never hid bottles, Mr. Henderson," I said gently. "I planted tulips." He signed a new statement right there on the coffee table. He stated that he had never actually seen me drink, that his entire testimony was based on hearsay provided by Eleanor Carter. But the real victory came from the Millers. They were the holdouts, the ones who had insisted there was a doctor involved. When I approached them this time, I didn't come alone. I brought a copy of the fake patient file from Whispering Pines that Avery had uncovered. I stood on their porch and held up the paper. "You said my mother showed you a file," I said. "Was it this one?" Mrs. Miller squinted at the page. "Yes, that's it. Dr. Thorne. She said he was a specialist." I nodded. "Doctor Thorne has never met me. This file was created 3 weeks ago. I have been out of the country for 2 of those weeks. This is a forgery, and if you don't retract your statement, you are going to be subpoenaed as witnesses in a criminal fraud trial." The color drained from her face. She didn't just sign a retraction. She gave me the detail I had been missing. She told us the doctor was a family friend. Mrs. Miller whispered. She said he owed them a favor. That was the connection. "Doctor Thorne wasn't just a corrupt doctor. He was compromised. While I was securing the neighborhood, Avery was tightening the noose on the bank. Derek Lorne, the relationship manager who had overridden the security questions, had been in a room with internal investigators for 6 hours. He was looking at federal charges for wire fraud and identity theft. He broke at 2 in the afternoon. Avery called me from her car. He gave us the text. She said, "What text?" Derek kept a screenshot. She said, "Apparently, he was smart enough to keep an insurance policy. 3 months ago, your mother sent him a text message. It is a photo of a birthday card you sent her 5 years ago. And the caption underneath says, 'Here's the signature style we need. Make sure the loop on the L is wide. That is how she signs checks. I felt the air leave my lungs. She sent him a template. She didn't just ask him to look the other way. She instructed him on how to forge my name. It was premeditated, cold-blooded fraud. We had everything. We had the stolen notary stamp, the fake medical file, the bank logs, the retraction from the neighbors, and now the text message instructing the forgery. But there was one final piece, the human element, her name. My sister was the only one who could stand up in court and tie it all together. She was the only one who could testify to the conversations inside the house. But she was terrified. I met her at a park on the edge of town at 6 p.m. She was wearing sunglasses. Even though it was overcast, she was vibrating with anxiety. "If I testify," she said, her voice trembling, "they will kick me out. I have nowhere to go. Isla, I have no money. The loan sharks are calling me every hour." I looked at her. She was 39, but she looked 12. "You are not going back there." I said, "I called Avery. We arranged for a safe house, a hotel suite in the city, paid for by the firm, under a pseudonym. We got a temporary protection order for a witness. I drove Blair to the hotel myself. She sat in the passenger seat, clutching a small bag of clothes, looking out the window as we passed the exit for our parents' house. "They are going to hate me," she whispered. "They already hate us." "Blair," I said, "they just hate you less because you were useful. Now you are not useful. Now you are free." I dropped her off with a security guard outside her door. I told her I would see her in court. I drove back to the beach house alone. It was 10 p.m. The ocean was black and restless. The house was dark. But for the first time in months, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a fortress. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and sat on the floor of my home office. I had one more thing to do. I opened the wall safe behind the painting. I needed to get the original deed for the hearing tomorrow. The real one. The one I had signed when I bought the house 7 years ago. I pulled out the file, but as I did, a thin yellowed envelope slipped out from between the pages. I frowned. I hadn't put this here. I picked it up. It was addressed to Isla, in a handwriting that was spidery and familiar. But not my mother's. It was from my great-aunt Sarah. She had died 4 years ago. She was the only person in the family who had ever told me I was good enough. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a legal document. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she died. "My dearest Isla," it read, "I know you bought the villa with your own hard work. I am so proud of you. But I also know your parents. I know David and Eleanor better than anyone. They believe the world owes them a living, and one day, they will come for what you have." I felt a lump form in my throat. She knew. She had predicted this. "I want you to have this." The letter continued. "It is a right of first refusal that I placed on the land 40 years ago when I sold the original plot to the developer. It states that if this land is ever sold or transferred, it must be offered to a blood descendant of the Evans line, specifically, the female line, before it can go to anyone else. And since your mother was disinherited by my father, that leaves you." I unfolded the legal document. It was a recorded deed restriction. It predated my purchase. It predated everything. It meant that even if my parents had successfully forged the deed, even if they had tricked the judge, the transfer would have been void ab initio, invalid from the start. They could never own this house. The land itself had a poison pill built into the title, placed there by a woman who saw their greed decades ago. I stared at the paper. Aunt Sarah hadn't just left me a letter. She had left me a shield. My parents thought they were fighting a lonely, isolated woman. They didn't know I had an army. I had Gordon Vale, the honest notary. I had Avery, the shark. I had the neighbors who had woken up. I had a sister who was finally brave enough to speak. And I had a ghost who had legally blocked them from the grave. I put the document in my briefcase. I turned off the lights. Tomorrow, we go to court. And tomorrow, I don't just win, I end it. The courtroom was no longer the quiet, sterile chamber where family disputes went to die. It had transformed into an arena. The gallery was packed. A local investigative reporter, attracted by the allegations of notary fraud and bank collusion, sat in the front row with a notepad balanced on his knee. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table, but they looked less like grieving elders and more like cornered animals. My mother was wearing a high-collared black dress, a sartorial choice clearly intended to evoke the image of a martyr. My father just looked tired, his eyes darting toward the exit signs as if calculating the distance to freedom. Avery Klein stood up. She did not pace, she did not wave her arms, she simply walked to the evidence table and began to build a wall. "Your Honor," Avery said, her voice cutting through the hum of the ventilation system, "we are not here to debate the emotional dynamics of the Carter family. We are here to present a forensic timeline of a criminal conspiracy." She laid down the exhibits one by one. Exhibit A, the affidavit from Mr. Gordon Vale, confirming the notary seal on the transfer deed was stolen 3 years ago. Exhibit B, the digital access logs from First Coastal Bank, provided by their internal fraud division, showing that the IP address used to drain the defendant's credit was located in the plaintiff's home, not the defendant's. Exhibit C, the metadata from the settlement email sent 48 hours ago, containing a hidden clause for medical power of attorney. Exhibit D, the text message from Eleanor Carter to Mr. Derek Lorne, instructing him on how to forge the loop on the defendant's signature. The courtroom was silent. The weight of the paper trail was suffocating. Every lie they had told, every manipulation they had engineered, was now lying on a table in plain sight, stripped of its emotional camouflage. My mother stood up. She did not wait for her lawyer. She ignored Mr. Sterling's frantic hand gesture to sit down. "This is twisted," she cried out, her voice cracking with a desperation that sounded almost real. "We did this for her. We did this because she is sick. Look at her. She lives alone in that fortress. She has no husband. She has no children. We are her parents. We sacrificed everything to raise her." She turned to the judge, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter Blair is the only one who knows the truth." My mother sobbed. "Blair has been there. Blair has seen the breakdowns. Blair sacrificed her own life to care for us while Isla turned her back on this family." Judge Holloway slammed her gavel down. It made a sound like a gunshot in a canyon. "Sit down, Mrs. Carter," the judge ordered. Her voice was ice. "This court weighs truth, not performance, and right now, the truth is sitting on that evidence table." Mr. Sterling looked defeated. He knew he had lost. But my mother was not done. She pointed a shaking finger at Blair, who was sitting in the witness box. "Tell them, Blair. Tell them how she threatened us." Blair looked at our mother. Then she looked at me. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking for approval. She was looking for an exit. Blair leaned into the microphone. There were no threats. Blair said, her voice was small, but it was steady. My mother gasped. "Isla never threatened anyone," Blair continued, gaining strength. "The script about the alcohol. The script about the voices, Mom wrote it. She gave it to me on Tuesday night. She told me if I didn't memorize it, I would lose my apartment. She told me that if we didn't get the guardianship, the loan sharks would come for all of us." "Objection! Mr. Sterling shouted, standing up. "The witness is hostile." "She is not hostile." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said calmly. "She is sworn in. Continue, Miss Carter." Blair took a breath. "They plan to have Isla committed. They have a doctor, a friend of the family, waiting at a clinic called Whispering Pines. They were going to keep her there for 72 hours until the drugs made her compliant enough to sign the power of attorney. They didn't want to help her. They wanted to erase her." My father slammed his hand on the table. "She is lying. Isla bought her off. She paid off her debts to get her to say this." The accusation hung in the air. It was their last card. If they could paint Blair as a mercenary, they could muddy the waters. I stood up. I had been silent for the entire hearing. I had let Avery do the talking. I had let the evidence speak. But now, it was time to close the book. "Your Honor," I said. Judge Holloway looked at me. "Ms. Carter?" I picked up the leather briefcase I had brought with me. I opened it and pulled out the yellowed envelope I had found in the safe the night before. My parents claim they are the rightful stewards of the Seabrook Dunes property. I said, they claim that family legacy dictates this house should belong to them. I walked to the bench. This is a document dated 4 years ago, written by my great-aunt Sarah Evans. It was found in my safe, tucked inside a file I hadn't opened since I bought the land. I handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. It is a right of first refusal. I said, Aunt Sarah placed a restriction on that land 40 years ago. It states that if the property is ever sold, it must first be offered to the female descendants of the Evans line. My mother knew about this document. She hid it. She tried to block me from ever knowing that the land was, by rights, already earmarked for me. I turned to look at my parents. But here is the interesting part. The notary seal on Aunt Sarah's document? I checked it against the logbook provided by Mr. Gordon Vale. I paused. It matches. It is authentic. Gordon Vale notarized this document 40 years ago. His logbook confirms it. This is the real history of this family. The document my parents submitted is a forgery created with a stolen stamp. This document is the truth, sealed by a man who respected the law. The judge looked at the paper, she looked at the date, she looked at the seal, then she looked at the forgery on her desk. It was the checkmate, the real seal versus the stolen one, the true legacy versus the manufactured one. Judge Holloway set the papers down. She took off her glasses. She looked at David and Eleanor Carter with a look of profound professional disgust. This court has seen enough, she said. She didn't even ask for closing arguments. The plaintiff's motion for guardianship is denied. The plaintiff's claim to the property at Seabrook Dunes is dismissed with prejudice. That means you cannot refile this, ever. My mother started to wail. A high, thin sound of total collapse. Furthermore, Judge Holloway said, raising her voice over the noise, I am referring this entire file to the district attorney's office. I am recommending immediate criminal investigations into forgery, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping under the guise of medical guardianship. She banged the gavel. Bailiffs, please escort the plaintiffs out and ensure they do not approach the defendant or the witness. My parents were led out. They didn't look at me. They were too busy arguing with each other, blaming each other for the failure, their voices rising in a cacophony of toxic recrimination as the heavy oak doors swallowed them whole. I stood there in the silence that followed. Avery closed her folder and gave me a small, sharp nod. Blair was sitting in the witness box, crying softly, but she was smiling. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, blinding sun of the afternoon. The air smelled of exhaust and freedom. A camera crew was setting up near the stairs, but I didn't stop for them. I didn't need to give an interview. The record spoke for itself. I turned to Avery on the steps. It's over, she said. No, I said, looking at the skyline where my parents were disappearing into the back of a taxi. It's just beginning. I looked directly at the camera lens of the news crew that had just turned in my direction. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just delivered the truth. You didn't sue for the house. You sued for my right to exist. But I brought light to where darkness fears most. And for the first time in 42 years, I turned my back on them and walked toward my car. I didn't need to prove I was worthy of their love. I just needed to breathe, and the air had never tasted so sweet. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know family dramas can be heavy, but sometimes we have to fight the battles closest to home to find our true freedom. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice and resilience, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Smash that like button. And smash that like button to help this video get recommended to more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and see you in the next story.